how challenging was it? Should I use a different word? What was the process like editing something like that, as well as being an EP on the film? And were you physically present on the set for that, for all the production, or most of it at least?
Well, good question. I'm with Tim. With Tim, I'm always with him,
Okay.
right near the set. Primarily, his movies are done on the set. His best ones are done, are set movies. And he calls me to the set. He comes in the cutting room during the day. He's very involved in the cut, and he learns from the cut. Other directors don't want to look at the cut, a lot of them, until they're done shooting. But for him, it's a learning process. He comes from animation, so he's very particular and specific about what he gets. He's not a commercial director who I've worked with a lot of who they just cover everything. And that's great later, but it's not precise work so much. It finds its footing in the cutting room and in post-production. Whereas Tim comes in during the day, like I say, I get the video tap, we call it, which
Mm.
comes out of the cameras on set right into the cutting room during the day. So I won't even have all the footage of a scene and I start editing it. And, I'll put black banners in for uh, uh, close up missing or, moments that I would like. And Tim comes in and he goes, yeah, that's a good idea. Or sometimes, "No, I don't think we need it." But it's that kind of a process during shooting with all of his movies. And so it's been great for both of us. And he actually, probably about a third of the way in, or maybe half the way through production, every Friday I make a version for him. He sees the movie as it is, and it gives him ideas about the characters, the emotional content, if he's being true to the narrative, and really helps him continue. And he gives me a couple of notes too, which are great. So the nice thing about that collaboration is in some cases when directors see their first cut, the assembly, they want to retire and get out of the business because it's either long or unfocused or most scripts are overwritten. But in the case of Tim, at the end of shooting, when I show him the whole movie, he's basically seen it. So there's no there's no agenda. We just go to work and do what we have to do.
That's incredible. And it's so true what you said about seeing a cut and trying to, sort of say goodbye to it. I remember the very first film that I directed. I'm in the doc world, doc narrative world, and
Great.
now sort of shifting into narrative. But I remember the very first doc that I did. Um, it's all seems fine and dandy, like when you're working on it, but when you sit down in the post production and like, oh crap, you're right, and then that's where the path of should I continue doing this or should I, move on? But it's a daunting thing for sure. Like, you just don't you think you're just getting shots, but the story thing makes a huge, that's what's it all about. It's all about the story at the end of the day, and that's it.
Yeah. And, it is difficult showing a first cut. Uh, it's just always, especially with commercial directors, because I mean, Armageddon, I think, was 3.5 hours first cut, maybe Pearl Harbor the same, with Michael Bay. And then it's a matter of whittling it down and focusing. It's a lot more work. Whereas Tim's a very, because of his animation background,
Mm.
he shoots a lot of takes for performance, but it's not a lot of angles. It's sometimes he only shoots one camera. A lot of his DPs don't like to shoot two cameras because they're not lit for it. They light it for one angle. But the last few he's had two cameras. His director of photography has have encouraged it. But it's a good way to go. In the case of Alice, um, so much was being evolved after the cut, in terms of visual effects and um, creating these characters that weren't there, adding the voices. We basically had off-screen voices for
Yeah.
Johnny when he's, the Mad Hatter sitting at that table with all of the animated characters. we didn't have, we didn't have the real actors there off screen reading him lines. So he was great that way. I mean, they're all so well trained. Helena was terrific, and Crispin Glover was interesting, and all the live actors in the movie in the beginning and the end were classic British theater trained actors. And since then, it's been a long time. I've seen them in a lot of really special projects. So it was an honor to be working with them.
That's amazing. And of course, the great Alan Rickman, even though he had a very small part, but it was nice to hear his voice. Uh, he was just one of a kind that certainly is missed. I mean, I know like growing up with Die Hard, and you know the most classic antagonist there ever has been, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. No, it's the Blue Caterpillar. He was
Yeah.
spot on. He was spot on. And we actually did I think it was what was it, Sweeney Todd with him. Um,
Yes.
and he and actually Tim Spall, who's also a voice, as Bayard and Alice were both in that movie, how many years later, as real characters. So he's so watchable in anything he does. And he loved the movie. The preview in New York, the premiere in New York, he was very, very nice to me. And I was honored by his presence.
Right. Just kind of jumping back in time, Chris, and I hope you don't mind. What was the catalyst in you becoming who you are today? How did the journey start in general in the film industry as well as with Tim Burton?
I was one of those guys that all my roommates wanted to be lawyers in college, and I had no interest in that. I came from a more artistic background, I'd have to say. Um, I would draw a lot as a kid, more internal things. Um, and so I left school after 2 years, university, and went to an art school in East Bay, California College of Arts and Crafts. And
Mm,
while I was there, I made a couple little films and enjoyed it. And my oldest brother, knew the guys that made Woodstock. They're much older than me, and they were going to make another movie on the American Revolution for the bicentennial. We're talking 1976.
mm,
So I was a kid. I left school, drove down to LA. They let me stay at their house, the director, Michael Wadley. And there was an editing machine there that they did Woodstock on in the garage. So I played with it a lot and could thread it up. And, I gravitated a bit toward it because it was very much like drawing. I mean, it was an internal, back then, editing was very much you in the film.
yeah,
Now it's you and 8 studio executives and 3 producers and a director and writers and previews, and it's a whole nother ball game. But
right.
back when I started, I I enjoyed it, and I became an apprentice on something after being a PA, and just kind of worked my way up and got lucky really, because during those times you could you could make a movie. They were called independent films. There was no studio involvement. It was financed by individuals who wanted to see their name on a movie screen, basically, um, and could deduct it from taxes back then. So I did like 3 or 4 of those editing before I ever assisted or even handled film. I was cutting my hands on the film because it would move fast through those moviolas. And so I just kept at it, and ended up on Weird Science, which is one of my first feature films for a studio. What was it? Universal.
Mm,
And then I did Top Gun from there. Moved over to Paramount, had an association with Tony Scott. He kept me very busy. And my co-editor who hired me to do Top Gun, Billy Weber, brought me on to Midnight Run, who he had made the first Beverly Hills Cop with Marty Brest. So, that's how the business works. I kept working, and um, Tim Burton needed a editor for Batman Returns. So I went in to meet him, and he went to art school too, in at Cal Arts, which was that same version, but down in Southern California. I was in Northern California, and we connected pretty quickly. And I loved all the toys on his wall, and we he hired me pretty much. And from then on, I was fortunate enough that I did every one until, for I think there's been 14 movies, including the animated ones, which we did Nightmare Before Christmas during Batman Returns. And just because I was there, it's a long process in animated film. Henry Selick would come down, we'd show 3 shots or something. They take forever as it was stop motion on the chem, and he ended up asking me to help him continue with it when Batman Returns was finished. So that was fun. It was my first animated film with him. Then there was Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie after that down the road.
If you want to watch the full conversation of this clip, be sure to click here and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.